Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. And we are back after a long hiatus. I would probably say around a month, but you know, we rested during that time. We had some breath, we had some relaxation.
Yeah.
And now we're back. We're punching, and we have yet to review the final season of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Arguably the most important season.
Arguably the most important season. But you know what's exciting about this sort of long hiatus that hopefully we will never do again in some regard is that, you know, it has given us the time to really think about, ponder what we actually believe and what we actually think of this season of Book 3, Season 3, Book 3, Fire of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm just going to go right off the gate with my sizzle serve. And I'm just going to say right now, to start the podcast, this is the worst season.
Whoa! That is a fucking sizzle serve. This entire conversation is going to go a lot different than I thought it was going to go. Oh, fuck.
So
okay,
I have a lot of issues with this season. We can kind of tackle it one by one. But I think the biggest issue at the end of the day is the sort of pacing with this season, right? Yeah. So we have, to explain, halfway through the season, we have the invasion that has been hyped up since like the middle of the second season, right? The invasion of the Fire Nation that the main characters enact. The invasion happens, and the invasion goes terribly wrong. So now they have to recoup their losses, the main characters, and kind of do a part 2 of taking down the Fire Lord, which takes place the last 4 episodes of the season. With that being said, I think there are a lot of issues with having the invasion halfway through the season, and then having like a sort of second invasion for 4 episodes at the very end. And one of the bigger things for me, I want to discuss this first and foremost, because it grinds my gears, because I think they did Zuko dirty this season.
Okay, yeah. I could see how you'd think that, yeah. Is it partially because of May?
No, it's not. Because it feels like in the first half of the season, this is what happens. In the first half, Zuko realigns himself with the Fire Nation, right? And then at the turning point in the middle of the season during the invasion, he turns his back to the Fire Nation and instead joins Aang and his crew and his posse. But what I feel like was destroyed for Zuko's characterization was it was as if he had kind of, sort of, relatively forgotten all of his progression that happened in the second season, and it's like it seemed like he had rejoined the Fire Nation at the very end of the second season and stayed with them throughout the third. It felt like a sort of fickle decision, and it wasn't a decision that necessarily was. We didn't go through a lot of difficulty in him making that decision, right? And he's with the Fire Nation for a long time. Then my bigger issue with that whole thing, like, let's just say we leave that aside, right? When the season turns around and Zuko is with Aang and his crew, there are only, like, not even, 6 episodes that he's with them, to the point that each episode with Zuko with the crew is like Zuko goes on a field trip with this specific character. Zuko goes on a field trip with Aang to the dragon. Zuko goes on a field trip with Katara to get the guy who killed her mother. Zuko goes on a field trip with Sokka for a 2-parter to save his dad from the prison. It's bothersome for me to see like this sort of characterization built up and then kind of shuffled away, and then like, okay, we need to bring this back, and then not given enough time to really see Zuko grow with the group.
Are you claiming that he does not go through enough trials and tribulations?
I think he does. And
Good.
That's part of the thing that bothers me, why he sticks with the Fire Nation for the first half of the season.
I see. Right. Okay.
It felt
because I was about to say, I was like, no, he goes through a lot, but yeah, okay, that makes more sense. That you felt like you they just kind of like crammed it in at the very end. Honestly, that's my biggest review for this as well. Like my biggest takeaway is kind of the same as the last couple episodes that we made on Avatar: The Last Airbender, except like tenfold for this season, is that this 30-minute structure was not what this show needed. We needed so much more time, and it was tough. I was talking to one of my friends about this recently. It was tough to have this. It was tough to have the series be rushed and like shortcutted at certain times.
Yeah.
Like for instance, so like whenever Aang is fighting the Fire Lord, right? And it's like at the very fucking end, and it's this huge deal, and you're super down and excited about it, and then you're like, wait, he can't do this without the Avatar state. I wish that I would have like 10 minutes of him just figuring out how he's supposed to spiritually enlighten himself to the point of the Avatar state. But instead he just hits his back on a fucking rock. And you're like, what? Why did we... What? Like, this could have been done so much better. Or like, the fight with Azula and Zuko. Like I wish that there would have been more to... It felt like Katara was like an ornament on that fight. Like she wasn't actually deserving to be there, or whenever she was there, she was just kind of like a hassle. And you're like, if we were given more time, maybe like I could have understood or respected this decision more. But yeah, it just felt so rushed. All of it felt so rushed. Yeah, I combine to that.
It's disappointing because you can really tell when the second season ends. Like this is what the series is building up to. But I think this season is a classic example of biting more than you can chew. I think the series gave itself, at this point, like a lot of characters, and then the showrunners were like, okay, wait, we actually need to progress these characters right now. I think a good example of that is, I think, one of, if not the worst episode in this series. If it's not number one in the worst, it's number two. The beach. I want to talk about the beach. I think the beach is an awful episode. Do you disagree?
I absolutely disagree.
Wow. Okay, so
in my mind, Azula doesn't make sense, and I don't give a shit about Azula, and I want her to die until the beach. And all of a sudden, Azula becomes interesting to me, and she only becomes interesting at the beach.
So I disagree. First of all, I want to get that on the front end. Second of all, I think Azula only gets interesting to me, which is a shame because, like, fundamentally, like, as sort of like an idea, I like her character. I like the sister of the anti-hero that kisses up to the villain. You know, like, I like that, right? But my issue with Azula is Azula doesn't get a lot of progression, and I don't think she gets any real progression until she loses her mind at the very end of the season. I found her progression, as well as May, as well as Ty Lee's progression, that they just crammed into this one episode to be really, really forced. And it felt like, what this episode felt like, it's okay that this episode was a sort of parody of itself, right? I'm never really opposed to that. That the villains, the enemies go on this like beach trip, and it's like a college town, right? Like that's funny to me. But this episode also felt like right underneath the showrunners being like, we need to, if we want to keep May and Ty Lee and Azula, mostly May and Ty Lee, as like fundamental characters in the season, we need to give them growth, right? We need to give them explanation. We need to give them a reason for like how they think, what they are, who they are. So this episode is going to describe it. And what this episode ended up being at the very end, where Zuko, May, Ty Lee, and Azula are crowded around the fire at the very end of the episode, becomes a sort of really forced, as if it was written by a high schooler, sort of emotional spill of each character. Like Ty Lee being like, I'm this way because I had 8 brothers and sisters, and they were all exactly looking like me, and they were all cooler than me, and I'm just a failure. And then May just doesn't have emotion. Azula is even worse. And Zuko, we already experienced Zuko's arc, and then they decided to erase it so he could spend some time with the Fire Nation and grow as a character with May. So that's and that's just one episode, and it feels like they wasted 30 minutes, or they wasted like 23 minutes on that. You know what I'm saying?
I think, yeah, a little bit. I think the issue that they kept running into is that they felt the need to give a full 3-act progression to every fucking character they introduced, and it's like, we don't need all that shit. Like,
yes, I agree.
Ty Lee can die in a river. She can fucking drown for all I care. Ty Lee I don't give a shit about Ty Lee. Like, leave that shit alone. May, it could be kind of interesting, but she doesn't necessarily need to have this full fucking arc. You can just give her 2 acts if you want. Like, she starts one place, something happens to her, she ends up in, like, that, like, make that super fucking simple. You don't have to give May so much fucking screen time.
Yeah.
Zuko and Azula should have gotten way more screen time. It's like, specifically between them. I liked their relationship. I liked Azula's and Zuko's individual responses to their relationship. I think that definitely should have been explored more. But in terms of individual arc or individual discovery, I did not care at all about Azula or whatever the fuck she was doing. I was just like, okay, so you're evil, big fucking whoop, until the beach, because the beach is what, not their actual time on the beach. The last scene, I agree, was kind of strange, but specifically seeing her at the party, specifically seeing her around normal people, and then realizing she had no option. This was the only thing that she could have been. She didn't have an option to be a good person. She didn't have an option to be normal or live a normal life or fall in love with someone or do anything except for become the Fire Lord someday. And that it takes place in this, like, deep-rooted insecurity. I got all of that in one episode, and that was really interesting to me. Do I wish that I would have gotten more of the I wish I'd gotten more payoff, but the information, I thought, was given to me at a good time.
So you were saying, let me get this right, that you understood Azula as a character when you saw the episode The Beach. Is that right?
100%.
Like, you understood her sort of, like, how she views, how she navigates the world.
100%. And not necessarily the again, not the fire scene, not at the very end. Like, all the May and Ty Lee and Zuko bullshit of that episode was just not worth it. Also, seeing Zuko flip out and, like, get all jealous, that was kind of funny, but it didn't have anything to do with anything. I didn't give a shit. The main thing was watching Azula have to try and interact with people that aren't below her, trying to be a normal person. I was like, wait a second, this is really interesting. This is a really interesting way of telling me about this character. That's what I got from The Beach. I thought The Beach was kind of interesting in that way.
For some reason, maybe this is on me. I will just say that. But I did not get that one bit when I was watching this episode. And, like, to the point that I do think that they did Azula dirty as a character. I don't think they used her properly in sort of this progression, because I don't think because first of all, I want to get this straight, that we have Azula for the entirety of season 2, right?
Yeah.
And I think the season 1 sort of villain, Zhao, he can get away with sort of being more one note, because you can kind of tell, like, he's supposed to be more like just one note, right? That he doesn't have to be anything more. He just has to be a sort of device to get the characters going, right?
Right.
But when you introduce a character that has such a close tie to one of your main characters, to the character that probably experiences the most progression in the show, maybe the only other one being Katara, you kind of want something more to take place, right? Like, you want a better Zhao, right? Essentially, at the bare minimum. And I don't think we get that. I think we just get Azula being really, really cold for the entirety of season 2, and nothing beyond that. And then we get to the episode on the beach where she is still like that, but I didn't understand, I suppose, that piece of information where, Azula operates like this because she has to operate like this. Like, I never got that. And I never even got that at the very end, too, that she has had to act all cold and stuff. And I think where they were going for at the very end of the season of her sort of suppressing this love from her mother, right? I wish they had maybe explored that more. Maybe have that.
Yeah,
more
that
so
was a very, very, very loose fucking plot point that they did not explore again. I wanted so much more info on that mom.
Which, I mean, like, and it makes sense, right? I was never opposed to, at the end, her kind of losing her mind because of, like, the absence of her mother, right? I never was really opposed to that, because what we were sort of built up to with some of the Zuko progression, that their mother loved Zuko so much, right? And so there could be this inherent absence of love for Azula, or like Azula was unlovable and so her mother couldn't do anything, yada yada yada, right? I was never opposed to that, but it didn't seem like they could have used that earlier, as opposed to saving that for the very end.
Yeah. I see where you're going from. I think that, like, the thing that made the beach episode so interesting for me, and the reason that that Azula hit at just the right time, is because that was right around the time where because I was like the 5th episode of the season, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give Azula another shot. Like, I'm gonna try and buy into her again as a like a villain for Zuko or whatever. And we're a couple episodes in the season, and I'm like, okay, you know what? She's just not doing it for me. I just don't get it. Like, she's cold. Great. Why? Like, why do we never see her be a real fucking person? And then it's interesting at the beach, because right about the same time, it was like, oh, wait, this is her trying to be a real person. This is her trying to be a warm person. And this is the best she could possibly do, which is not at all. Which is why she has to be this way. That was interesting for me.
I have a theory as to why I dislike Azula fundamentally in her interpretation as a character. I think it's because how she pushes Zuko and how she pushes actually it's primarily how she pushes Zuko. How she pushes Zuko has less to do, it seems to me, with what she actually does, and she pushes Zuko more so because of who she is. Does that make sense? Like, it's his sister, right? His sister is, you know what? Maybe I'm talking out of my butt.
No.
The more I actually think about this.
Keep going.
Because I haven't spoken in a second. And I need to filibuster a little bit as I sort of reach
the conclusion.
This mental process, right? I don't think Azula pushes Zuko because of what she does. Because Zuko is always driven because of the presence of Azula, right? Because of who Azula is. That those two characters aren't necessarily foils, right?
Sure.
Both of them, honestly, like, Zuko is cold in his own ways. What makes Zuko different from Azula is that Zuko's trying to push past that, right? And, like, he has that sort of push, right? I mean, before the series begins, from his father to kind of progress his character, right? But Azula never gets that push. Azula gets that push at the very end of season 3, at the very end of the season, right before she fights Zuko and her last moments on screen. That she has a sort of like life-altering moment, right? Like, Azula, to me, maybe the big thing too is that she doesn't change throughout the series. Like, I think Aang matures, Katara goes through some stuff
Yeah.
in this season, even though to some degree I think they did Katara kind of dirty a little bit. Sokka grows, I think, very well. Like, just you don't see this sort of like obvious growth, but once you look at his character from the first episode to the last episode, he grows tremendously. Toph is another character that really grows with the group, right? Zuko's growth is obvious, as well as Iroh's growth with his relationship to Zuko. Azula doesn't grow really at all, and it feels like she's more important than Mei and Ty Lee. She's meant to be important. It just feels like they really neutered, the possibility of her being more than just what she baseline is.
Yeah, I get that. Which was my problem as well until the beach. Whenever I realized, oh, she doesn't have the capability of being anything else, and so that character made more sense to me. But it did seem like a very lazy and annoying way of handling the character. Like, why couldn't you have given her more than just this? Yeah, this like one. I don't know. This one facet. She was so not complex, and I think that again that was a testament to, or that was partially to blame, the quantity of characters in the so little amount of time that they had to tell this story, and I would like to talk a little bit whenever we come back about the episode whenever they're like recapping everything at the very end with the Fire Nation play, because I think that's a very interesting
Island players.
Yeah, the Ember Island players, because I think that's going to be a very interesting launching point for us. Okay, so this is a word from our sponsor. Thanks. All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. So yeah, we were just talking about the rushed nature of the show and the absolute fucking hoops that they all had to jump through to fit in a 3-act arc for every single character that they decided to introduce in this crazy show. And that was the big downfall. Not necessarily that it was a bad show, but that was the downfall.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, we talked a lot about the beach in the first part. So I'd be interested to talk a little bit more about the Ember Island players, because that is such an interesting concept to me in a TV series that specifically I don't think that's as relevant nowadays, or that would be as effective nowadays, because you can watch shows at the pace you want to watch them. But whenever you have a show that like comes out week by week, and is only 30 minutes and is on like it's built for kids, you constantly have to feed information in very specific ways, to remind everyone of like certain plot points, certain arcs, certain things about the story and about each character. So it was very interesting to me that they had an entire episode devoted solely to reminding you what's happened so far, so that the last episode and the finale can hit you in just the right way. Because they didn't give you the recap near the beginning of the season. They gave it to you at the very end, right before you needed to know all the information that to fully be impacted by the last episode. Was this an interesting device for you? Would you be interested to see this tried again? I am going to make you watch Legend of Korra, and it is the funniest shit in the world, them trying to mimic that that specific episode, because they tried to do their own version, and it's genuinely the most garbage fiery thing I've ever seen in my fucking life. It's so infuriating. But
wow.
What do you think about this version?
So in the first part, when talking about the beach, I briefly mentioned that throughout the entirety of this series, that if that is not the beach, that episode, if that episode is not the worst episode, it's second worst, right? And so then it begs the question, well, what is the worst episode if the beach isn't? And it is so easily, I mean, the Ember Island players. This episode is bad. This episode is bad.
Because it's
because here's the thing. At least with the beach, they were trying to do something.
Yeah,
right?
It halts the story. That's what you're about to say.
This episode is really bad. Look, there are some episodes that are like sort of fluff, right?
Uh-huh.
Let's just call it fluff. This sort of filler episode that nothing really happens.
And that's all 3 seasons.
Right. No, I don't like blame episodes, like doing that here and there. I'm not opposed to that, right? But it's like where this episode comes in, okay? It is right before the season finale. Aside from so much of this episode being like silly garbage, we're gonna get to that. There is a little bit of progression in this episode, right? Where Aang goes to Katara and was like, "Hey, when we kissed during the invasion, I thought we were gonna be together forever." And that's really the only progression that happens in this episode. And that took, let me look, maybe 4 seconds to say. So that's like the only progression in this 23-minute episode. What happens in this episode? It basically recaps the entire season and makes a parody of itself. But you know why this episode is bad? Is because we already watched the entire season, the entire series. The entire series is already laden, is already enriched with jokes and stuff that you can kind of poke fun with. We don't need a parody of a comedy. It's redundant. It's not good.
If you are an 8-year-old and you
Right.
can only watch one episode a week, is that effective? Is that an effective strategy? Do you need to get the recap for the entire series in order to fully appreciate the last episode?
That doesn't make the episode itself good in where it fits in the series.
Yeah.
It does. I don't think it excuses this episode, really at all, because the main characters don't do anything.
Yeah.
Right. They don't really go through much of anything except for the 4-second snippet I just said as Aang.
Yeah.
Hardly anything happens, and what we get is just the show poking fun at itself, right? But the show poking fun at itself also exposes the flaws in this show, right? So I think the best example of like when Jet died, but he didn't actually die because we never see him on screen die, so it was very unclear. And so Jet dying being unclear, what happens in this, like the parody in the Ember Island players, and then Sokka turns to Suki and was like, yeah, it was very unclear whether or not Jet died. And so that's the show poking fun at itself. But that's the show also being like acknowledging the sort of flaws that it has within itself.
Specifically because it moves too fast. Yeah.
Because also, like I said earlier too, that this season bites off more than it can chew. And so when you have episodes like this, instead of more episodes with Zuko actually being with the group, the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Okay, because one of my biggest issues with this episode is that it fundamentally screws up the opportunity of the group dynamic that it has. So we have like the core 3 that really start the series, and we got Toph, right? So we have those 4. Yeah, and that's a very good group on its own. And then, aside from the animals, and then you add Zuko and Suki, right? 2, in my opinion, great characters.
Yeah, oh yeah.
2 really fun characters to have in the room, to just interact with one another, right? And so when you have that opportunity, the hell are you doing writing an episode where they do nothing?
Yeah.
They do nothing.
Yeah.
And instead, what the latter half of the series becomes is that it's rushed field trips with Zuko, and it's Suki just becomes downgraded to Sokka's girlfriend, as opposed to making herself being more of a cool character and interacting more with the rest of the group instead of just having one cool moment at the very, very end, and then everywhere else she's just Sokka's girlfriend. So this episode bothers me because it's a waste of time, and time you could have used to actually just have legitimately one last nice time of the characters being together, as opposed to the characters like being together but their focus is somewhere else, right? Like, we should have had the characters focus on one another in this episode and grow together. And I think this episode is such a missed opportunity because it's the last episode before the 4-season finale. And what happens in the 4-season finale is that everybody splits off.
Yeah. Which is the biggest, like, they do not need to split up. They do not need to split up. Uncle Iroh being like, yeah, like, we're all going to have to, like, take different battles or whatever. No, we don't, actually. We could have just all gone and killed the Fire Lord, or, like, taken his powers or whatever the fuck. We all could have gone and beat Azula together. We all could have gone and taken back Bossy, like all this shit. It is very frustrating that, because honestly, what should have happened is that they did the invasion, the second invasion. It didn't work, and then they spend a 4th season doing each fucking thing. Okay, we took down Azula, like Azula's now put away in jail, and then we like took back Ba Sing Se, and now Fire Lord is like this big, and he's like in his, tiny little lair or whatever, and he's like the only piece of the puzzle left and then you can fight him, Aang. And it okay, another thing that really bothers me is that there's I think we talked about this a little bit with Seven Samurai, that in Asian culture, and specifically Japanese culture, there is this idea of fate and destiny and honor that we don't really understand, and that we don't really have a version of that in American culture, specifically American entertainment.
Yeah, it's not as ingrained
right
into our sort of like belief system.
Right. So like if we were to see it, it wouldn't impact us as much. We need it to be we need that thing to be kind of spoon-fed to us, because that's not the very first thing that we think of. It felt there were a couple times where it was like, okay, clearly the character is doing this because they feel that it is their destiny, it is their duty, it is like what they have been called to do this thing. Zuko fighting Azula, Katara fighting Azula, Aang not killing the Fire Lord, and also deciding to take on the Fire Lord by himself without anyone else. Aang like going to the Guru and like there were so many things where it felt like it was more about fate and destiny, but that was never really talked about. It was just like, oh well, it'd be best if we split up, and so it kind of makes sense for Aang to take the Fire Lord, and well, I mean, if we're talking about like powers, then the only people that could probably take down Azula are Katara and Zuko. It's like, I wish that there would have been more arc and story and emotion attached to each of the fights and each of the decisions they made, rather than just kind of stumbling into the decisions.
I think the only exception to what you stated was Aang going against the Fire Lord, and like it's almost like the entirety of this season is sort of like other characters telling Aang he has to kill the Fire Lord. He has to kill the Fire Lord. He has to kill the Fire Lord. So like I have no problem with him going off on his own against the Fire Lord, but I think you are kind of honestly on the money regarding it's not good when your character splits up. It's when your character split up, it's not good when you have such a big group that is so intrinsically tied together that are treating themselves sort of like a family, and then they kind of split up really far from one another. I don't know, like it feels like it didn't necessarily have to be 4 episodes.
Yeah.
You know, this season finale. So there's some issues, and I think that's the sort of bare minimum.
What's your gold medal?
That we see that. I'm gonna have to give my gold medal, and here's my issue with this season is that I was looking at the characters in this season, and I was thinking to myself, man, nobody really stands out. I'm going to give my gold medal to somebody, but it's of the necessity, right? It's like watching a sports game, and it's like a sports championship, and it was a really ugly game. Like, it was just like bad offensively.
Yeah.
It was just ugly defensively.
It's giving Andre Iguodala the Finals MVP.
Listen, I love Andre Iguodala because he's on the Heat now, but yes. I mean, I agree. And so I'm giving my gold medal to Sokka because I think, like, they properly used Sokka as a character this season. I think the episode with him going to with the sword master, the episode titled Sokka's Master, I think is a really good episode on its own, and it's just a really nice episode for, like, this is Sokka's moment. Yeah. And Sokka has, like, moments kind of, like, sprinkled throughout the series. I think the library is another very good example of Sokka's moment, right? Like, his moment is getting to this library and then using the calendar to figure out when there's going to be a solar eclipse, blah, 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 right? Like, that's another Sokka moment. And I think Sokka has a lot of moments throughout this season that I think it's nice to see this season and, like I said earlier, not confirm, it's reflect on the growth that Sokka did experience. Who are you thinking of giving your gold medal to?
I think it's so sad because it's not even because I liked what they did with the character all that much. It's just the character had a lot of solid payoff, more than anyone else, and they had a lot of interesting information to give in terms of world building. Because that was one thing, again, like I told you this on book 1, and one of the coolest parts of the show is that you never stop learning about the world. There's not a single episode where you don't learn something about the world and the way it operates. And I appreciate that because it's not like this story happens isolated in time. Like, it's the only thing that happens in this world's history. Like, this world has thousands of years of tradition and history, and we're just seeing 3 seasons of it. We're just seeing these people interact with it, you know? So getting all that, like, at first I was like, man, I kind of wish I would have, like, figured out, like learned about this, you know, like, lion turtle thing earlier. But then I was like, wait a second, you know, I've been getting a lot of information at a pretty good pace. I feel good about that.
Yeah. I agree with that. I didn't feel like the introduction of the lion turtle was absurd.
Yeah, not at all. And that's because of conventions. The show set you up for you're never going to stop getting really wild, like, just mind-bogglingly contrasting and important information about the world up until the very end. And that's something that they do in Korra as well. That's actually really cool. So I'm going to give my gold medal to Uncle Iroh because him hugging Zuko and forgiving him was maybe the only time that I got close to, like, actually having an emotional response to the series. I loved learning about the White Lotus, and that, like, that is because that made him make so much more sense to me. I thought that he, like, it was fantastic to me to see everyone, like, realize that Uncle Iroh is probably the most powerful person and the most wise and virtuous person in the entire world.
Yeah.
That there were a bunch of world leaders that were like, yeah, this guy's the absolute fucking best, you know? I appreciated that, and I thought they wrapped him up pretty nicely.
What I really liked about Iroh this season, it was as if he got growth of growth as a character when he wasn't even on screen.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I think that's one of the coolest parts about his character. Like the mere lack of presence that he had this season and how that affected Zuko.
Yeah.
Was also huge for that character too.
Yeah.
I think they used Iroh really well this season.
Yes, I totally agree. So, in summation,
yes,
I think because this is a very iconic show, there are a lot of people in the world that like really deem this as one of the best cartoons of all time, one of the best kids shows of all time, and I think that the main reason that is the thing that makes the show stand out is that if you look at the channel that it was on, if you look at the influence that influences it that the show is drawing from, if you look at the things that were airing around the same time as this show should not have been this good.
No, and the quality of acting too overall.
Yeah, it was supposed to be much more average, and it ended up being a lot more complex than anyone was preparing for and was ready to consume. And I think that is what makes this show so special and something that is gonna be around for forever.
Because I think where this show succeeds is that it tries to do so much more than just tell jokes.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not like it goes out there and it tells jokes and it tells those jokes really well, and then it does something more, right? And then it tells a compelling story with compelling characters and visually creates. You said it when we looked at the very first season. Super interesting world with this beautiful blend and mixture of cultures. As well as providing this scenery that's gorgeous and ideas that are full to life.
Yeah.
And even fight choreography that's insanely creative and how characters use their abilities is just genius.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that's like half the draw.
That's why I think this succeeds.
That's half the draw of the show is that as you're watching it, you want to watch the next episode just because you just want to keep living in the world, you know? It's not even just the story that takes you there, but it's that you're like, I just love these people in this place so much. It's really hard to not keep watching.
I think that's at the very least where this season still succeeds.
Yeah.
Is that it's still a really interesting world, right?
Yeah.
Like when we get bloodbending is just fascinating.
Oh fuck yeah.
And
then like the energy bending, holy shit, that's so cool.
Yeah. It's just the series still does a really good job. I think part of my issue with this season, I think a lot of times that it leans more to fan service than it does to actual payoff. I think like the reintroduction of Suki was fan service as opposed to like actual payoff of her as a character, right? They just threw in Suki. And then other characters like the boulder in the invasion, right? Like there were a lot more obvious fan service as opposed to like this character that you saw before is going to get payoff now, right? And that's where I think the second season succeeded in so much more. So the best example being Jet.
Was second season the best season for you?
Oh, easy. I think if I were to rank the seasons, I would go 2, 1, 3.
Uh-huh.
Because it felt like season 1 does exactly what it set out to do, right? Gives you a bunch of like exposition information, and like the bunch of exposition isn't the greatest, but it's all in service for the payoff in the second season.
Yeah.
Right? And then the third season is they bit off too much, more than they can chew, and they try to do too many things with too many characters in too little time. And that's my issue with the third season.
But I think in a way, in the way that you just explained it, it kind of lends itself to this, and I think is kind of what we're saying this entire time. The third season is the worst season before it even starts. Or the third season is set up for failure before it even starts, because they know that they have to finish the tie everything up in the third season. They have all these plans for these characters. They try to fit it into what time they have, and they just, like you said, they bit off more than they could chew. But the bite that they took in like season 1, and they've been chewing this entire fucking time, and 3 seasons isn't long enough to chew. Yeah. So I'm not even sure if that's season 3 being bad. I think that is poor planning, and that is poor storyboarding.
I mean, but I think that lends itself into season 3 being bad.
Sure.
That poor planning. Sure. And that's the biggest thing that draws back the season. This season could have been the coolest season and the most intense season, the season with the craziest stakes, and it does have really high stakes, the highest. But its execution on that is not met, as opposed to, I think the second season does everything it sets out to do. Do we ever get to your sizzle serve?
No, but I think that we talked about things that were just so much more important that it doesn't even really matter. I honestly can't even remember what my sizzle serve was at this point.
Wow.
Because I had something at the beginning, but we've just talked about so much that I feel like it'd be redundant, because I really do feel like we touched all of the most important bases of the series and of the show.
Also, before we leave today, Combustion Man, bad character, boring.
Yeah, Combustion Man is just so fucking lazy and
perfect,
stupid. Yeah.
And if you disagree with us, find us. I dare you.
Find us, fight us in the street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if you were to be a bender, which bender would you be, Danny?
Oh, I think somebody asked me this question a few weeks ago when I told some people that I was watching Avatar. I think I would have to choose between water or air. Are like the two that I think I kind of like sort of float between in terms of like how I approach my body, my corpus in this world. What about you, McKeon?
That's so interesting. I love that you just used the word corpus, you fucking nerd. I see you very much water. For no reason other than I've never seen you stop thinking about the beach.
I mean, that is true.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the waterbenders are all from cold places, except for like the swamp people. And I'm like, there's no beach
so
people.
all of a sudden, you're a
Get
fire
outta
person.
here.
You're a firebender.
Come on.
I would say that I am becoming more and more air. Yeah. I'm feeling air.
I can see that. I could see either like air or maybe earth for you.
Yeah. But I think that earth is such a good default. Like, if I don't know where to place someone, I usually just place them in earth.
Fair.
That's just like
fair assessment.
Yeah, humans is just people, especially because like Earth is the only kingdom that we saw regular people everywhere. You know what I mean?
For the most part, yeah.
And there were a lot of people that
I mean, we still saw regular people like a lot of places except for air.
But there were a lot of people in the Earth Kingdom that didn't even bend. That like didn't even. Yeah. But like in fire, like everyone bended fire.
Consistently.
But yeah. In Ba Sing Se, there was just a bunch of random motherfuckers.
For the most part.
Anyway, yeah. So, would you recommend this to people that you know?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I really enjoyed the series, and if you're looking at, I mean, honestly, like a Saturday morning cartoon, you know, like you just made some breakfast, you know what, I want to put something on. I think this is a good series. If you have kids, they'll love it.
Oh fuck yeah.
It's nice, relaxing, doesn't take a lot of mental effort to understand. It's just a fun ride, and it's a fun, nice, funny, and endearing, exciting ride. What about you?
I totally agree. I think that if you're looking for something lighthearted, something like a really easy watch, that's the biggest thing, an easy watch. Like if you're looking for something that's very palatable and something that's short in time and in commitment, as well as, yeah, like you said. I mean, this really is one of the best kids shows I can think of. So if you got kids, or if for some reason a child's watching the show, which I'm sorry if you are, but if there is anyone that is the primo audience for this show. It is super solid. So that I think is yeah, I think that's what I would say about the show.
Mac, next week we are going to be viewing and discussing a movie that I haven't seen, and shame on me for not having seen it, but I think this is the right time to watch this movie. The movie is 42.
Fucking Jackie Robinson.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
The reason why I chose this movie is that, unfortunately, just a couple days ago, Chadwick Boseman lost his life to cancer.
Yeah.
And we are living in this world where this sort of I shouldn't say like politics and sports, but speaking out and sports is really sort of coming into one and being more of a focus for a lot of athletes nowadays, and especially in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think this movie, for both of those reasons, is a good thing to look at right now, in terms of the advancement of the black man in American culture and society.
That's super fucking exciting. And I also really want to talk to you and record something about the change in sports, and whenever the power is taken from the fans because there's no fans to give power to, and all the power is given to the players, how that has changed sports and sports media and the NBA especially, and how the NBA has really led that fucking fight. Yeah, that's going to be a really exciting episode. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that next week. Thank you, Mac. Have a good one.
You too.